Marcus never imagined his marriage would come to this. He and Evelyn had built a life together, filled with shared dreams, laughter, and silent understandings. But something had shifted in the past year, something intangible but undeniable. At first, it was the late nights, the growing silence between them, the way Evelyn's eyes seemed to linger elsewhere even when she was in the same room. Evelyn's mother's passing had shaken her to the core. She withdrew into herself, the grief wrapping around her like an impenetrable fog. Marcus tried to be there, but nothing he said or did seemed to help. Eventually, she sought professional help, Dr. Carter. Marcus had supported the decision. He wanted Evelyn to find peace. But as time passed, she didn't seem to be coming back to him. Instead, she drifted further away. He noticed the little things first. The way she would check her phone with a small smile. The texts she would quickly close when he entered the room. The extra time she spent getting ready for her sessions. But he dismissed it. After all, she was grieving. She needed an outlet. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Marcus decided to voice his concern. "You've been spending a lot of time at therapy," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Is it helping?" Evelyn paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. For a moment, something unreadable flickered across her face before she smiled. "Yeah, it's helping a lot." That should have reassured him, but it didn't. Marcus spent the next few weeks in a haze. The house felt emptier, the air thicker with silence. Evelyn's absence was like an open wound, raw and unhealing. He told himself he should have seen it coming, that the signs had been there all along. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the confirmation of his worst fears. Work became his refuge. He threw himself into projects, staying late at the office to avoid the crushing loneliness of their once shared home. But no amount of distraction could erase the image of Evelyn and Dr. Carter, laughing, touching, betraying. One evening, Marcus found himself parked outside Dr. Carter's office. He had no plan, no real intention beyond trying to understand. What was it about this man that had drawn Evelyn away from him? What had she found in those sessions that she couldn't find in their marriage? The lights in the office were still on. Through the blinds, he could see the silhouette of Dr. Carter sitting at his desk, writing something. The sight ignited a surge of anger in Marcus's chest. This man had crossed a line, taken advantage of his wife's vulnerability, and manipulated her into believing she needed him more than her own husband. Marcus clenched his fists, debating whether to go inside. But what would he say? What would he do? Accuse him? Demand an apology? None of it would change the truth. Evelyn had made her choice, and it wasn't him. Instead, he drove away, feeling no better than before. Back home, he sat on the couch and stared at his phone. Should he call Evelyn? Ask her how she was? If she missed him at all? But deep down, he knew the answers. She had moved on, and he was left picking up the pieces of a marriage that no longer existed. Marcus hadn't spoken to Evelyn since she left. Their house, once filled with shared routines and quiet conversations, had become a hollow structure, a place where only echoes of their life together remained. He found himself drifting through the days, caught between the past and an uncertain future. One evening, after yet another restless night, Marcus decided he needed closure. Not the kind that came from forced distractions or meaningless reassurances, but real closure. He needed to understand. He needed to face Evelyn one last time. It took him a week to gather the courage, but finally, he texted her. "Marcus, can we meet? Just to talk." Hours passed without a response. He told himself she wouldn't reply, that she had moved on completely. Then, just before midnight, his phone vibrated. "Evelyn, tomorrow, 6 p.m., our cafe." Their cafe. The place where they had spent lazy Sunday mornings, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. The place where, years ago, he had proposed. The next evening, Marcus arrived early. He chose a corner table and waited, fingers drumming against his cup. When Evelyn walked in, it felt like an old wound reopening. She looked the same, elegant, calm, but there was something different in her posture, in the way she carried herself. She was lighter, freer. She sat across from him, offering a small smile. "Hi, Marcus." "Hi." His voice was steady, but his heart was a storm. They sat in silence for a moment before he finally asked, "Why him?" Evelyn inhaled deeply, as if she had been expecting the question. "I didn't plan it, Marcus. It just happened." "That's not an answer." She hesitated, then sighed. "With Dr. Carter, I felt seen, understood. I could talk to him without judgment, and over time, I started feeling something more. Something I didn't feel with you anymore." Marcus clenched his jaw. "So you replaced me with a man who was supposed to help you?" Evelyn flinched. "I didn't want to hurt you. I wasn't happy, and I didn't know how to tell you. So you cheated instead." She looked away. "I know I was wrong, but I don't regret it. I found something I needed." Her words stung more than he expected. He had wanted her to apologize, to show some remorse. But instead, she was certain, unapologetic in her choice. Marcus exhaled sharply. "I just needed to understand." Evelyn nodded. "And now that you do?" He stared at her for a long moment, then looked down at his coffee. It had gone cold, just like their marriage had long before she walked away. "Now I let you go," he said, and for the first time in weeks, he truly meant it. The days blurred together after Evelyn's departure. Marcus tried to convince himself that he was healing, that he was moving forward, but the truth sat heavy in his chest. He had let her go, said the words himself, but the absence she left behind felt like an echo that refused to fade. He went through the motions: work, grocery shopping, late-night television. Yet, in the quiet moments, his thoughts drifted back to the same question. Had she ever really loved him? Or had their marriage simply been a placeholder for something better? It was a dangerous thought, one that sent him spiraling. He didn't want to be the pathetic man who pined after a woman who had already moved on. But the resentment inside him still burned, smoldering beneath the surface. One night, against his better judgment, Marcus found himself searching for Dr. Carter online. The man had a pristine reputation, countless glowing reviews from patients, articles praising his methods, even a few interviews about his approach to therapy. It infuriated Marcus. No one seemed to see him for what he really was: a fraud, a manipulator, a man who had crossed the very boundaries he claimed to uphold. Without thinking, Marcus opened a blank email and began typing. Subject: ethics complaint. He hesitated. Was this the path he wanted to take? Would it make a difference? Would it make him feel better? Instead of hitting send, he closed the laptop. No, this wasn't how he would reclaim his dignity. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He needed to see Evelyn one last time. Not to beg, not to argue, but to look her in the eye and make sense of what had happened. He needed an answer to the one question that haunted him most. Had he ever truly mattered to her? Finding her wasn't difficult. She had moved into an apartment downtown, a place she had once mentioned in passing, back when they had talked about dreams of a fresh start. A bitter smile touched his lips. She had found her fresh start, just not with him. Standing outside her building, Marcus hesitated. He had imagined this moment over and over, picturing all the ways it could play out. Would she be surprised to see him? Angry? Indifferent? Before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped inside. The elevator ride to her floor felt like an eternity. When he finally knocked on her door, his heartbeat pounded in his ears. Evelyn opened the door a moment later, her expression shifting from shock to guarded curiosity. Marcus. He swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was minimalist, elegant, unmistakably her. Marcus took a slow breath, grounding himself before turning to face her. I just need to know one thing, he said quietly. Did I ever make you happy? Or was it always going to end this way? Evelyn's gaze softened. Marcus, it wasn't about happiness or unhappiness. It was about change. And I changed. He let out a bitter chuckle. So I was just collateral damage? No. You were part of my life. A huge part. But I outgrew who I was in our marriage. And I couldn't pretend otherwise. Her honesty cut deeper than he expected. He had been bracing for excuses, for half-hearted apologies. Instead, she had given him the truth he had asked for. And it hurt like hell. Marcus exhaled slowly. I won't chase you anymore. I just needed to hear it from you. Evelyn gave him a small nod. I hope you find peace, Marcus. He turned to leave, pausing just before stepping out. I hope you do too. As the door closed behind him, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The weight he had been carrying, the anger, the resentment, began to loosen. Maybe this was what closure was supposed to feel like. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to let go. The silence in the house was no longer deafening. It had become something else, something lighter. It had taken weeks, but Marcus was beginning to understand that moving forward wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting. And he was finally ready to do just that. He spent his days focusing on himself, rediscovering the passions he had once abandoned in the name of marriage. Music, which had once been his solace, filled the rooms again. He picked up his old guitar, running his fingers over the worn frets, and played until his fingers ached. There was something therapeutic in the way the notes filled the empty spaces Evelyn had left behind. His therapist, his own, not Evelyn's, encouraged him to embrace the grief rather than run from it. It's okay to mourn the end of something, she had told him during their last session. But don't let that loss define what comes next. So, Marcus took small steps. He reconnected with friends he had neglected, venturing out for dinners and casual meetups instead of isolating himself. He took weekend trips alone, finding peace in places he had once dreamed of visiting with Evelyn but never had the chance. One afternoon, he found himself in a bookstore downtown, a place he had always loved but hadn't stepped into in years. As he browsed the shelves, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus. He turned, surprised to find an old friend, Rachel, standing behind him. They had met years ago, long before Evelyn, but life had pulled them in different directions. Now, she stood before him, smiling warmly. I thought that was you, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. How have you been? He hesitated before answering, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. I'm doing okay, he admitted, and he realized he meant it. They talked for a while, catching up on the lost years, and when Rachel suggested grabbing a coffee, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't a date, not in the traditional sense, but it was a step towards something new, something unknown. As he walked through the city that evening, the air crisp and fresh, Marcus felt something stir within him. Hope, not for Evelyn, not for what they had lost, but for himself, for the future. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer controlled him. The road ahead was his to walk, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to take that journey. And so, with quiet resolve, he did.